I got to run back to where I was. Yay! Welcome to Deep Distinctions. We're going to talk a little bit about networking right now. Hopefully, not take as long as I did before. A lot of the stuff we're going to be talking about now is a backroom thing. It's something that a lot of you probably have no understanding of, have very little experience in. And that's what networking ends up being. It's something that I specialized in as a graduate student. And I've always had a kind of a weird fascination with it. Networking, digital networking, is actually a very old communication style for long distance communication. It used to be that we didn't have long distance communication. As far as you could yell, or as far as somebody could see, was about as far as communication should go. In the early 1800s, 19th century, something called the telegraph was developed. Wires were strung. Here's a little indication. These are a couple of guys stringing up wire for a telegraph. You had to keep it up off the ground because you actually used the ground as part of the circuit that you made. You only had to string one wire. And it didn't start out that way. You know, before we start understanding things about how circuits can be made. Anyway, let's not get into that too much. They strung up these wonderful telephone lines. And if you know anything about Morse Code, I don't know, it's getting to be kind of dated stuff, but it's very, very important still. If you're into networking, you're still basically communicating the same way, only faster. Sometimes you hear my little radio going off, and it does a little communication in Morse code, dots and dashes, da, and you get that was the first way that we communicate information. You strung those dashes and dots together in the Morse code for letters. You would put the letters together to form words, and then you would put together an entire message. And that's how messages were sent long distance. Cables are still used predominantly, even in this internet age. If you're transmitting data from one continent to another, it goes through cables that go under the ocean, underground cables. So a lot of you just don't, it just doesn't. There it is. You can hear it. That's Morse code. And like I said, this is stuff that's hidden. You know, we used to have fun with people when we tell them about, so where does milk come from? And they go, well, it comes from the grocery store. And you go, you understand how this really works, do you? You know, and they go, of course I do. I understand that. And you go, no, you don't. It's okay. You know, milk comes from cows, and there's a very sophisticated system. It's quite logistical that helps you to get milk from some cow on a dairy to your store. You don't know anything about it. You just know that milk costs a lot, and you probably go, I don't understand why it's like, water with white food coloring in it. You go, man, it's more complicated than that. There are some reasons why it costs what it costs. And I'm not going to say that people don't mark it up sometimes in a weird way. It doesn't matter. Just like that, you got to know that digital information, when it comes into your company, it has to go through a rather intricate network to get to you. And the infrastructure is represented, at least in this case for me, by these telegraph lines. It's a good representation because it's honest. A lot of our data traffic still travels over a basic medium like copper wire, or anymore these days, fiber optic lines. Wonderful stuff. Okay. Then we upgrade to, well, we don't upgrade. Telegraph line is the infrastructure. One day they decide, hey, can we send voice transmissions over these telegraph lines? And they found out that they could. Alexander Graham Bell, if you guys are into history at all, came up with the first telephone back in like 1870. I think he put it out publicly in 1876. I think it was the centennial year. And so he started stringing tons and tons and tons of wires. Each one of those wires would carry, here, let me give you kind of how things go. Well, no, I won't. Sorry. Guy, I'm going to do a bad job of this one. You would have one voice conversation run all the way. Let's say you were in New York City and you want to talk to somebody in Los Angeles. They would set up a circuit for you. This little thing here is what used to be very common. Operators would take what's called this patch panel, these patch cords, and they would say, okay, here's somebody in New York City. He's talking on this circuit. And they would take a wire and they would connect that port on the patch panel with another one headed toward Los Angeles. And eventually, going through several paths, you would get a connection to Los Angeles. Not very efficient at all, very expensive. I know you guys think that communications is nothing because it doesn't cost you much. When I was a young person, it would cost you $1 a minute to talk to somebody on the telephone, long distance. So you would definitely want to have something to say. You wouldn't have a chit-chat conversation on the phone because it would cost you way, way, way too much to do that. Definitely used mostly for business communication. Mere humans still wrote letters when I was a kid because that was the way you could communicate long distance without it costing you a ton. That's a circuit. You create a circuit from one point, and then you would, through various means, get to the other point. Now, over time, we got the way you could direct dial. You didn't need an operator anymore. That's what you're accustomed to, is being able to dial somebody's remote phone number. And there is a mechanized, at first it was mechanized, now it's more electronic, automated system that would connect up all those wires for you. But it would still basically be a wire going from you to the far side person. Now let's talk about, well, you know what? Let's go ahead and leave it at that. Next time we're going to talk about the railroad, because that's probably the most coolest part of the whole thing, is railroad and logistics and how you get things from one place to another. Before it was about supplies and materials. Now it's about, it has just as much to do with data as anything else. So we have our first thing here, trying to connect up long distances. We don't use the operators anymore, but you kind of do. When you type in a number, you're actually giving it to kind of an electronic version of an operator. And they connect up that circuit for you so that you can talk from one place to another. So the next video that we have, we'll talk a little bit more about, we'll talk about the railroad and about packets, because packets is really one of the great secrets of how the internet works. And we'll see you then.